Hello, everyone, and welcome. We'll just wait a quick minute here to continue letting people in, and we'll get started in just a minute. Okay, so we'll go ahead and get started tonight. Hello and welcome to everybody joining us tonight. I am very excited to introduce our author tonight, Paco Underhill. He is here to discuss his newest book, How We Eat, The Brave New World of Food and Drink. How We Eat reveals the future of food in surprising ways and shows how food intersects with every major battle we face today, from political and environmental to economic and racial. Copies of How We Eat are available for purchase at Hudson's independent bookstore, The Learned Owl. We will be putting a link in the chat to purchase the book on their website if you're interested. And we will be leaving time at the end of the program for a short Q&A with Paco. So please feel free to submit your questions throughout the duration of the program using the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen, and we'll get to as many as we possibly can with what time we have left. And now to introduce Paco. He is the best-selling author of 3 previous books, Why We Buy, The Call of them All, and What Women Want. He is the founder of Envirosell, a global research and consulting firm, and his writing has been featured in the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal, Washington Post, the New Yorker, and Smithsonian Magazine. So with that, I'll pass things over to Paco and get things started for the evening.
Good evening. Thank you for coming. I am going to presume that many of you have never attended one of my lectures before, so I'm going to give a little intro, but with an apology to somebody who's seeing me not for the first time. I often introduce myself as a refugee from the world of academia, that some 40 years ago, I was a poor part-time adjunct instructor in a doctoral program in environmental psychology, or the effect that space has on people's behavior. I came up with a way of using observers and a motion picture camera to measure how people move in interior spaces like banks and stores and airports and libraries and museums. It was a way to comprehend the difference between what people say they do and what people actually do. I was very struck, having stepped off into the world of commercial market research, that so much of the understanding or projected understanding was based on interviews or questionnaires rather than watching. I started knocking on doors. And you know, I'd never taken a business course. I'd never taken a marketing course, but I knew a lot about understanding how people move. And while it took me a little while to get my foot in the door, once I got in, it was really fun. Because if you think about much of business education in the 20th century, the focus has been on strategy. And my focus, while certainly there were strategic implications, was tactics, meaning that I could walk into a store back then and even today and go, if you move this, let me show you where to move it to and watch the difference in what happens. It was really exciting. We started off with some hardware stores, then we went to music stores, then we went to bookstores, and then before long, I was running the principal testing agency for prototype stores and bank branches in the world. It took us by complete surprise because we were a bunch of academics. Pretty soon, we had 10 offices scattered across the world, and more than a third of the Fortune 100 list were clients. We worked in 50 different countries. And that work started off, of course, in stores and banks, and then moved to hospitals and airports, security systems, even work in a number of our nation's largest public libraries. I started writing books in the late 1990s, in part because I fell in love with the wrong woman. I fell in love with a beautiful classical musician who worked every night and every weekend. Could you imagine being involved with somebody who worked every night and every weekend? I had to come up with something to do nights and weekends to stay out of trouble. And that was writing books. It was astonishing. I never expected my books to be as popular as they've been. They're out in 27 languages. The largest market for the first one last year was simplified character Chinese, 60,000 copies. They're used in design schools and MBA programs. And it's been a wonderful, nerdy ride. In 2017, my publisher knocked on my door and said, Paco, it's time for another book. And I stared up at the ceiling and I went, you know what? I want to construct another best-selling book. Everybody eats and drinks. I've worked on restaurant chains. I've worked on QSRs, quick service restaurants. I've done studies of drive-thrus. I've worked in supermarkets on 6 different continents across the globe. And in my last count, I think 24 different countries. I knew a lot about how people bought their food and beverages. I'd even worked for the adult beverage industry, the brewers and distillers, and that work, again, had been all over the planet. So I set out to write this book about food and drink. And then you know what happened? COVID hit. COVID hit, and it just was devastating to all of us, particularly those of us in the retail world, because all of that testing stopped. My office in New York was doing 1/3 of our work in China, and all of that froze. In March, when COVID hit, I had to walk in to my bedroom, stare at myself in the mirror and go, is this really the book that you want to do? Is this really the book that our reading public needs? And the answer was no. I was going to write a book about how do we get to a healthier version of ourselves. And it wasn't that I was going to tell you, don't eat this, do eat that, but that if I could change the prescription in terms of how you went to a restaurant or how you went to a grocery store or how you went to a farmer's market, I could get you to a healthier version of yourself. And perhaps just as importantly, or maybe even more so, get us to a healthier planet. It was a profound decision for me at this stage in my life to go, I'm going to write a book. And if I step on a few big companies' toes, I don't care. Do you know what? I took my own advice and I've lost 30 pounds. It's been relatively easy. But part of what has been exciting here in the broader world of retail and food and beverage is to understand that while there are these biological constants that stay the same, 90% of us are right-handed. Our eyes age in the same way, blah, 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 blah. Part of what is exciting is that there's an evolution of us. And there were 6 things that we were seeing before the pandemic hit that are going to bubble through the next 40 minutes that I spend with you. And there are 6 things that while they were happening before, got either accelerated or morphed by COVID-19. First is the understanding that thanks to computers, thanks to telecoms, our relationship with screens has fundamentally changed the way we see. The connection between our eyes and our brains has been affected by the computers we look at, the screens we look at, the number of people staring into their phones. But do you know one of the ironies about that is that the way we interact with screens and technology at age 25 and the way we do it at 55 is different because there are different factors that affect our eyes. Yet, if I go to the design studios, whether they're in Columbus, Ohio, 2 hours away from you, or whether they're in New York or Paris or London, the person sitting at the CAD/CAM screen doing the design work is generally under age 30, and they tend to design for themselves. Issue 1 is, how do we see? Issue 2 is, when I stepped off into the world of commercial research, the fundamental difference in shopping behavior was between men and women. And while those differences certainly exist today, it's gotten a lot fuzzier. Thanks to birth control, there's a fundamental shift going on in the context of our culture. And I make no moral or religious judgments here, but do you know that more than 60% of the graduates from institutions of higher learning now are female? And the number of American households where the woman is the dominant bread earner goes up with each passing month. Is there a glass ceiling? The answer is unequivocally yes. On the other hand, there's a shift going on that a lot of us are not particularly comfortable with. Some of us are more comfortable than others, but it is a shift. Third issue here is, if we think about the difference between men and women, there's another difference that has come up particularly in the past 10 years and has morphed even more during the pandemic, and that is the difference between generations. Meaning, at age 55 or at age 70, the way we do things and the way we do it at 25 is just different, including how we see. Those differences are affecting the way a restaurant works. They're affecting the way a farm works. The effect that technology has on that is just profound. It is much easier to be a female farmer and to be a young farmer. Issue 4 is time. I can stand at a doorway to a store and watch somebody come in, and I can tell you how loud that clock is ticking inside our heads, or her head. We have so many of us that are trying to do our shopping in the context of multitasking. I'm trying to look after my kids. My kids are home from school. My husband is working. The dog needs a walk. Can I please get this as fast as I possibly can? Because I need to get in and out as rapidly as I can. And yet, if we think about it, almost every store is designed to hold us for as much time as they possibly can, because the premise is that the longer I hold you, the more money I get out of your pocket. Issue number 5 is, what is global and what is local? And that is, there are dresses that will fly off the shelf in Dallas that nobody touches in Philadelphia. There are foods that people will eat in Duluth that don't make any sense in Santa Fe. Some of it is driven by ethnicity, some of it's driven by a host of different factors, but getting local is one of the key aspects to our health and to getting to a better version of ourselves and our planet. It is the 21st century, and technology is letting us get local. And we have some exciting news for you on that front. The final issue here is money. We passed over a magic moment in the history of money in the late 1990s, where up until that point, the overwhelming majority of wealth was in the hands of an aristocracy who knew what they were buying. Today, if I look at the 20 wealthiest families across the world, 19 out of those 20 earned their money in the course of their own lifetimes. Wealth has lost its peaches and cream complexion. You can go to a counter at Neiman Marcus, and there every different type of skin shade there. Part of what this has meant here is that there is no longer, can we turn up our nose at ethnic cooking, simply because there are very expensive Chinese, Indian, Mexican restaurants. How do we understand money? Okay. I want to go to my first slide, please. Our homes and our lives are in transition. If we think about it, how do we live? How do we sleep? What do we do in our homes, particularly since we've been locked down? Does anybody live like this anymore? The answer is fundamentally no. Our homes are in the midst of a fundamental transformation, and that's going to affect how we consume. Next slide, please. The simplest pleasure that we have in our food consuming world is growing our own. This is my wife in our garden here in Connecticut. Not only do we have a garden, we have a greenhouse, we even grow stuff in the context of our kitchen. This is one of the keys to a healthier future, is to do some of it yourself. And it doesn't matter whether you live in an apartment or you live in a studio, you can do a little growing. And you know what? It changes how you look at food, and it changes your perception of what is fresh. Next slide, please. This is the other end of the spectrum. This is one of my favorite restaurants in Sao Paulo, Brazil, which is a restaurant, very fancy restaurant built around a tree. It is amazing. It's amazing food, and it is breathtakingly expensive. Are we still going to go to restaurants? The answer is yeah, but some of our choices when we get there are going to be driven by things that we understand better. I know a restaurant here in Connecticut where they list the calorie count of everything on the menu. They list about whether it's got salt or sugar in it. I think this is one of the ways in which we are moving forward, which is we're understanding better what do we order and what are the consequences. Next slide, please. This is my kitchen. Have you ever seen a kitchen like this before? This is designed so that there are, on the left are where the saucepans are, and on the right are where the fry pans are. It isn't done as a square, it's done as a linear. It makes it a lot easier to cook, and it makes it a lot easier to clean. Every architect that's ever been in my home and seen my little stove in my apartment goes, that is amazing, and it's so painfully simple. Yeah, our kitchens are in transition, and that's good. Next slide, please. Do you know less than 25% of American households, according to the 2020 census, have a mother, father, and dependent children in it? That Leave It to Beaver household that we understand has morphed into Cheers and Friends here. And part of what this has done is, what is a dining room? How do we use it? How do we cook? How do we share meals? I think of my two stepdaughters who were in Amsterdam, living in shared apartments where each of them had a refrigerator in their bedroom where their stuff was, and then there was a refrigerator in the kitchen which they shared with their roommates. This is a shift that's going on, the change in how we live. Next slide, please. You know that LG and Samsung are plotting for a digital kitchen. This is a kitchen where your refrigerator, your trash basket, your shelves will keep track of everything that's there. They will be able to construct a shopping list for you. They'll be able to send you a little text message going, can I order it? This is one of the ways in which the modern kitchen is going to work, which is having a digital partner. Next slide, please. Do you know that once we reach a certain age, roughly it's about 40, 80% of our supermarket purchases are the same thing? I mean, we have decided that we don't like Golden's mustard, we like Grey Poupon. We know the kind of dog food our dogs like. Why do we have to keep going back and looking at it the same way? Why do we have to keep going shopping in a store that was designed in the 1930s? There should be a better way of doing it. There are things that we get pleasure from picking out, and there are things that we really don't need to. And you know that we live in a world of packaging where everything was meant to scream at us from a shelf. But what if it doesn't have to scream at us? What if we could get it in a recyclable, repurposable, refillable container? I think it would be better, don't you? Next slide, please. This is ripe for reinvention. And do you know what? It's kind of sad that I can go to other parts of the world and people have figured out BOPIS, buy online, pick up at the store, and done a much better job at it. And there are places, for example, where there are canopies outside. There's a food vendor to help you get stuff. It's also where they're dealing with the labor cost issue. It isn't one person bringing one basket out to put it in your trunk. They have figured out, how do we borrow from the technology of a drive-through and be able to get to a more efficient version of it. But part of what we're looking at is there's a fundamental revolution going on between the truck bay in the back and the parking lot in front. Next slide, please. Man, visual cacophony. This is an HEB in Texas here, where somebody has put up signs with an Uzi submachine gun here. We need something better. We know that our grocery store was designed in the 1930s, and it was designed for a technology that existed back then. And it's time for some changes. Almost everybody is thinking about a smaller, more efficient store. Next slide, please. Why is the dairy case the farthest away from the front door? In virtually every market now, the milk counter is the farthest item away from the front door. I mean, this was back for a time when grocery stores fought polite wars, Kroger against Safeway. Today, I can buy milk in a wide variety of places. I can buy it at a drugstore. Do you know in other parts of the world, they sell milk in vending machines? I actually buy some of my milk at my local farm. But part of this is something where, yeah, it doesn't need to be in the back of the store anymore. It could be someplace else. Next slide, please. And man, what is this deconstructing here? This is our disconnect, which is, courtesy of labor issues and whatever, decon kills rats and mice for the holidays. This is meant to make you laugh a little. It's a dark slide. Next slide, please. Do you know, it wasn't until about 2010 that I started to meet females in the grocery store design business. Here is a young lady in a metro in Turkey trying to reach something on the top shelf. She's 5'2", and I can tell you the person who designed that shelf is at least 5'9". How do we make a store female friendly? How do we make it easier for people to pull something off the shelf? How do we stop people from having to climb the shelf to be able to get in it? That's all part of our future. Next slide, please. Oh man, the union of package and shelf. Can't we do it better? And we go to other parts of the world, and I'll show you some images. The Mexicans, the Brazilians have figured out better ways of doing it, ways that are faster, cheaper, and actually make the supermarket experience a little more enjoyable. Next slide, please. Theatrical lighting. Vegetables in our grocery store are theatrically lit. They look better in the grocery store than they'll ever look in your kitchen. Do you know that 20% of the produce that we buy in a grocery store, we end up throwing out because we don't consume it? We sort of buy it because we're fans. How do we get to a better version of consumption where we throw less things out? That's one of the topics in how we eat the brave new world of food and drink. Next slide, please. Man, have you seen stuff like this? This was at my local Target. I mean, we have empty shelves because the supply chain process isn't working. And doesn't that look a little sad? Shouldn't there be a better way of doing this? We know that the supply chain issues are not going to go away, and that we need to find a better way of managing them. I've been dealing with some of America's largest grocery and merchant chains since the pandemic hit, and that's one of the topics we're working on. Yeah, it's going to change. Next slide, please. the march of private label. I like this. This is from Pick and Pay in South Africa, which was one of my favorite grocery stores. But part of what this means is if we are a reader of Consumer Reports magazine, that the House brand, the Costco brand, the Kirkland brand, the Sam's brand has gone from being a compromise purchase because I'm trying to save money to a smart purchase because the brands get good grades. You know, am I ever going to buy Tide again? The answer is maybe, but we exist on Kirkland soap in my house. It's better, it's good, it's highly rated. I think this is one of the shifts that's going on. How come in the US there isn't a private label section within the grocery store? Meaning that if I go to a Carrefour in France, there's a section that has all of the house brands at the same place. Wouldn't you like to go to a place like that? You'd get good quality stuff and you'd save a little money in the process. Next slide, please. That union of shelf, package, and sign is another thing that's undergoing revolution. Do you know that the packaged goods manufacturers are telling us now, I could make that package not out of cardboard that might get recycled, but I could make it out of bird seed that you could go feed your chickens or feed the wrens and the sparrows outside. There's a way of doing this better, and it's a way of being able to do packaging in a way where the recycling issue is often painful. And we need to think about not recycling, but repurposing. Is there something else that I can do with it? And the answer is, yeah. Next slide. Man, do you know what a slotting fee is? It means that there are companies paying for the right to be at eye level, okay? And one of the things about virtually every major US grocery store is that the organization of what goes on the shelf isn't based on your interests, it's based on somebody who pays for the privilege of being there. There are some exceptions to that rule, but this is one of the things that many of us in the broader world of marketing and grocery are questioning. Next slide, please. Halal meat. Anyone know what halal meat is? That is meat for a Muslim family. This is from a Walmart in Toronto, Canada. Toronto is probably the most ethnically diverse middle-class city on earth. Do you know what this means? Is by having a halal meat section, it drives the sale of everything else, because this is where a Muslim family makes the choice. We know whether you're in Jersey City, in New Jersey, where you have a huge Filipino community, and the Filipino condiment of choice is something called banana ketchup, that this act of getting local and finding out who is it that's in your specific neighborhood, and are there things that are critically important to them? And the answer is, yeah. I like what Walmart Canada has done about understanding its local markets. Next slide, please. Welcome to Brazil. Aren't these cool signs? This is the new Pão de Açúcar that we worked on, which is about educating at the point of sale, meaning that they aren't just doing theatrical lighting, they're telling you about what the variety of vegetables are that are in the stand, and hoping that maybe you'll try something. Any one of you know what a watermelon radish is? I just started eating watermelon radishes maybe 4 years ago, and they've become a staple of my diet. They're delicious. I also love that crepe paper signage. Part of what we're watching here is that all across the world, people have come to look at Kroger's and Stop and Shops and whatever, and they've gone back to their own countries and reinvented. The cutting edge of the supermarket left North America 30 years ago. Next slide, please. I did like this. This is from a Big Y in Connecticut that I was just opened. This is Just like wine being paired with food, they are pairing beer with food, meaning that they are expecting you to be able to have a much more sophisticated sense of what beer goes with what. Do you think you would read this sign? Do you think this means that you're going to be always consuming Budweiser or Coors? No, it means that your consumption is going to be broader and governed by a more sophisticated set of criteria. It's coming. Next slide, please. This is, again, something from Brazil, where you have the ability to choose your own 12-pack or your own case. Do you know what it is? It is selling to women who are not buying beer for themselves. They're buying beer to entertain. If you're a hostess and you're hosting a party in São Paulo in the middle of a hot summer, and you go, we have some beer, and the guest goes, well, what kind of beer do you have? And if you can list out 4 beers, does that make you as a hostess appear better? The answer is it does. It does. And by changing this, they fundamentally changed the profile of who was buying beer. Next slide, please. Global versus local, okay? Icelandic yogurt, okay? Next slide, please. Next slide, please. Can you give me the next slide, the next image? This is where my yogurt comes from. I go to the local farm. That's my stepdaughter. We buy raw milk 50 feet away from the cow that gave it. We stick a little money in that slot over there. We take the beautifully rich raw milk home and we make raw milk yogurt from it. It's the best yogurt I've ever tasted. And if you tried it too, and you could find raw milk right outside of Hudson, Ohio, and you could make yogurt too. It's easy. Next slide, please. Getting local. Welcome to Texas here. Hot shit, special shit, aw shit, chicken shit. Do you think this would sell in Duluth, Minnesota? The answer is probably no. Might not even sell in Ohio, but in parts of Texas, having that spice to be able to put on my flesh is one of the most important parts of being able to make it my own. So I think this is, again, an example of local. Next slide, please. Israel. Do you know what that is? That's milk in a recyclable bag. That bag is meant to fit in a ceramic pitcher that fits in your refrigerator. Do you see the carton that's right underneath it? You can transport a lot more milk in a carton like that than you can standing it up in cardboard boxes. Do you know that there are parts of the world where this is the way people buy milk? When is it going to come here? Next slide, please. Welcome to Mexico. This is Soriano. Do you know that they restock shelves in parts of a Mexican supermarket using a forklift truck? Meaning the forklift truck comes out, picks up a shelf, takes it to a back room, a team refills it, the forklift truck takes it back out on the floor and drops it. There's a savings of almost 20% in labor cost. Does it make sense? It might not work everywhere, but in a great big huge supermarket, it makes an enormous amount of sense. Next slide, please. There are some disruptions going on. Aldi and Lidl, they are the same family that owns Trader Joe's. And they have disrupted the European grocery market because there are no slotting fees. The buyer is king. They're buying stuff and putting it on the floor. And do you know what? Educated English teachers across the US are falling in love with them because they get more for their money. They're good choices. and they can get in and out faster because the stores are much more concentrated and they're better organized. If you haven't made it to an Aldi or Lidl, go take a look. That's part of where our revolution is going. Next slide, please. Man, this is from Shanghai. This is a mushroom farm inside a shopping mall. You can go in the mushroom farm and you can point to things and they'll pick it for you, they'll cook it for you, or they'll wrap it up to take it home. Have you ever seen anything like this here in the US? It is amazing because in the exact same shopping mall, they have hydroponic gardens where all the vegetables served in the surrounding restaurants in the shopping mall are made within 500 meters of where they're served. That's a different kind of farm to table, don't you think? Have you ever been in a US mall that grew vegetables, particularly good looking ones, in the concourse of the mall? It's coming. Next slide, please. Container gardens. Thanks to the pot farmers of the Netherlands and British Columbia, our technology for growing organic hydroponic greens has fundamentally shifted. I can grow in a hydroponic shipping container the equivalent of 2 acres of land. I can power it with solar panels. This is a fundamental shift in terms of how we grow vegetables. You could grow a significant portion of the vegetables that are in an American supermarket on the roof or in the parking lot. It's coming here. It's exciting. We have to start learning how to incorporate more leafy vegetables into all 3 meals. Have you ever had spinach for breakfast? A little spinach and eggs. Really good. Plus some local cheese and maybe a little yogurt and some of your own blueberries. Yum. Next slide, please. The farmer's market. You know what's exciting about the farmer's market is they've started to learn that with a little processing, they have better margins. And with greenhouses and solar panels, you can have a small farm, less than 10 acres, and you can throw off a considerable amount of income. I talked to farmers in the Hudson Valley who are selling at the New York farmers market who are making a 6-figure income. It's a revolution. They're not just growing cabbage, they're making kimchi, pickled cabbage. I talked to a woman who had inherited her grandfather's potato farm. Do you know what she's doing now? She's making artisanal vodka and selling it in the farmer's market and getting a premium for it. Hey, I am so excited that the world of farming is undergoing a fundamental shift. And the more we learn about it, and if there are ways of being able to get direct to the farmer to get stuff, we are better off and healthier. Next slide, please. Again, part of what we're talking about is that processing. Crab Island, do you know the number of distilling licenses being issued across America is about 10,000? And the Bacardis of the world are scared. Because why would you want to try something that's made 500 miles away when you can try something that's made 50 miles away? Next slide, please. We are looking at movable supermarkets. This is an example of something that happens in other parts of the world where a farmer's market has a truck that goes with it. And we can go to small scale communities that aren't served by a big, huge grocery store. The market is open for 4 hours or 3 hours, and we can deliver a high quality service at a very good price. I keep pointing this out to the Krogers of the world that if you think about rural America, this may be a much better way of doing it. Next slide, please. Anyone follow Marion Nestle? Look her up in the library. She is a former chairman of the nutrition department at NYU. And she is a thorn in the side of big food. One of the questions that she's asking is if the sugar content of a cereal is beyond a certain percentage, shouldn't it be on the candy aisle rather than the cereal aisle? What do you think about that? I sort of like that idea. Next slide, please. So part of what we're doing is trying to connect. And this is one of the ways in which our future is going to evolve. That we need to find better ways of thinking about how we cook and how we consume. Next slide, please. Here's our summary. Retail is slated for change. Buy online pickup will happen with trucking bays, and back to your car innovation. Packaging reforms are going to come. Package reduction and cardboard reduction has to happen. Custom blending of laundry soap and pet food can get the manufacturer closer. And smart home interacting with the smart store, with the smart customer is here to stay. Next slide, please. Here is my new book, okay? It's funny. It's a storytelling book, and you can get it at your local bookstore. Thank you for listening to me tonight.
Thank you so much, Paco, for that. So we have a couple of questions coming in. I will get started with the Q&A to let some people have a little bit more time to think up some questions. But in the book and what you discussed in a little bit in your presentation is explaining the nuances behind the layout of grocery stores. And so I was curious to know, how do stores like Costco or Sam's Club or BJ's fit in with the supermarket model that you set up? And are there strategies that these kinds of retailers are using that a conventional grocery store cannot or does not use?
Well, I think one of the things which frustrates me about shopping at my local Costco is that there is no signage. Okay. And the act of going through the store, I have to make a commitment to time. I think one of the things that we are looking for, and this was actually pioneered by Staples, the office product store, which is the Staples store came up with what we called an arena design, meaning that the shelves were low in the middle, and as you got to the edges of the store, they went up. And do you know what happened there? The number of people who were lost declined precipitously. Do you know that in a typical Walmart or Target, roughly 20% of people are trying to find something and they don't know where they're going to find it? I think there's a better way of organizing a store to be more fair to a consumer. And that arena concept that Staples came up with was a really painfully simple and beautiful idea.
That's really interesting. Barbara Ann was wondering, she's noticed that hotels have begun switching from small sample sizes to refillable dispensers for shampoos and conditioners and soaps. And she was wondering if you have seen this example expand anywhere else or different examples for groceries or grocery stores.
Well, if we go back to a hotel, one of the things I think is very interesting is that there are other parts of the world where they're rethinking a hotel room for the female visitor, meaning that there are hotels that have mini washing machines in it. They don't have a chiller filled with beer and spirits. They have a mini washing machine. They have a better hair dryer. There are ways of being able to get you to sample product, meaning that they are not only giving you something in a recyclable container, but they're recognizing, and that they're floors of some of those hotels that are designed only for women. I think that makes a lot of sense. And part of what it does is it turns on some marketing engines. Do you know that for example, in parts of Brazil, women will call the hotel up and go, "Are you one of the hotels with the washing machine? Because that's how I pick my hotel." Do you think a guy would ever do that? The answer is, I don't think so.
Sure. Another question is about meat and how do we change our buying habits to include more local, humane, and cleaner meat products?
I think this is a very interesting question. I mean, I am, having lost my 30 pounds, I am not going to tell you not to eat meat, but I am going to tell you to eat better meat. And whether it's I'm shopping organic, whether I find a farmer that's buying meat at my local farmer's market, I'm just consume less and consume better.
Speaking of your 30 pounds that you've lost, Pamela was wondering, how did following your principles cause you to lose that amount of weight?
Well, I cut out a great deal of sugar. I cut down a great deal of salt. I tried to limit my consumption of processed foods, and I did a lot of walking. And part of what I found is that when I was a lot smarter about how I consumed and what I consumed, and making the choice just to fit my 10 to 15,000 steps in every day, that weight just melted off.
Mm-hmm. So speaking back to what you presented on with supply chain and retail, because retail is challenged with staffing, Mariette was wondering if store aisles are lower and hold less stock, more replenishment is needed. So what will retailers do to keep the customer experience positive?
I think that is a very interesting question, because one of the things that we know is that our supply chain engine before COVID was getting much, much better, meaning that I didn't need to stock 42 bottles tied on a shelf. I only needed to stock 3 because my supply chain engine about how I restock was infinitely better. I think one of the things that we knew before COVID hit is that virtually all of the major stores were looking to shrink their footprint, that I can put the same number of SKUs on the floor, but I don't have to have as many of them as possible. And just as I pointed out in that Soriano example from Mexico, other merchants in other parts of the world have found much more efficient ways of being able to restock.
Mm-hmm. Sure. Beth said that she and her husband met you last week in New York, and you gave a great recommendation for some of their orange wine. So she said thank you, and she was wondering, in Germany she observed a series of self-serve grocery vending machines and was wondering if those were going to be coming to the US.
Well, one of the things to recognize is that Germany copes with a labor issue that is very different than here in the US, which is all stores are closed on Sunday by law, and that many of the stores are unionized. Okay. I might point out for that lovely couple that I met on the streets of the West Village, or of the East Village, that the little restaurant that I co-own with some of my family members is called Ruffian. It is a wine bar that specializes in orange wines, which are wines that come from Eastern Europe. And we serve vegan tapas. And our target market is females, and 65% of our customers are female. I want to ask you the question, if you walk past 2 different restaurants and you saw one with 65% women in it, and you saw the next one with 65% men in it, which one would you think has better food? And if any of you are coming to New York, or any of you are on social media, Ruffian on East 7th Street has 5 Michelin sightings.
Very good. We have a couple questions about food deserts, and kind of we're wondering if you would speak on how to get fresh fruits and vegetables, and maybe technologies that are emerging that way. Someone pointed out it's much easier to get fast food in these kinds of areas than it is, okay, an apple or something like that.
I think this is one of the ways in which we start using the food truck or the food merchant, and being able to do, just as we saw the image of that truck moving into a neighborhood, opening up for a couple of hours and teaching people who don't have the same transportation issues about a place where they can come twice a week and be able to get good, healthy, inexpensive things to eat. And I might point out that the food truck business across the way has gone from what we used to call roach wagons to being food trucks, okay? And I think that that combination of mobile retailing is one of the ways in which we solve the food desert problem.
Sure.
All right, one more question.
Someone was wondering, do you have an opinion on kiosks to cash you out at a grocery store versus human clerks doing the same job?
You know what? Part of what is interesting is that in other parts of the world, they have figured this out. So let me just give you an example. When you go to ICA, the Swedish market, you walk in with your coat and your bag and your daughter. You pick up a cart, you put the bags in the cart, you put the daughter in your cart, you put your pocketbook in the cart. You pick up a scanner, and then you roll the cart across a scale, and it weighs the cart with your coat in it, your daughter in it, your bags in it. And then as you move through the store, you pick up an item, scan it, and the scanner records the item, the price, and the weight. Okay. And that as you go to leave the store, you push your cart across another scale. And if the weight checks out, you just go right out to your car. There is no more cash wrap there. And this technology is used in other parts of the world, and it's been there for more than 10 years. You go to a Dutch convenience store, and you don't have to pick each item up and scan it individually. You just stick it on a belt and it's done. I'm sorry, this is something where, you know, our technology for grocery store checkout is desperately in need of some work.
Sure.
I have three things which I believe in with messianic fervor. Amenability and profitability is linked. The Giving Good Store is looking at not only what you sell, but how you sell it. And the third thing that I believe in fundamentally is rubber-soled shoes. Because one of the keys to good retail management is senior management needs to get out on the floor and just take a good look.
Well, thank you so much, Paco, for coming tonight. And thank you everyone for joining us. This is a great discussion, and we hope you all have a good night.
Well, thank you. All right, how to